remains in whatever story I tell remains incomplete. So the glossary, the creatures glossary that I'm going to be speaking about today was commissioned by a research consortium called Creatures, which was funded by the EU Horizon 2020 program. And that consortium was working to, in their language, identify those aspects of creative practices that contribute most effectively to social transformations towards more sustainable ways of life. In the Creatures project, the glossary that I was commissioned to create was envisioned as a compilation of key terms and processes that could aid with creating better understandings through the use of, and this is a key word, a common language. So I'm going to give you some personal and conceptual context to the project and my approach, so the time that I was working on this project, before I walk you through the tools that I built using P5.js, and the workshops I facilitated to enable the fluid co-creation of a glossary. September 2019 was the time, yes, I was in the front room of my apartment where I'd lived through the 2011 revolution in Egypt and all the years of its aftermath. And out in the street, I heard "Ashab yurid isqat al-nizam, Ashab yurid isqat al-nizam," and I was transported. It was the same slogan I'd heard nearly a decade earlier from the same room. At first, I was frozen and then fascinated. Later, in the following days and weeks, darker feelings came. Darker times came. The years unraveled. I thought, I can't live through this again. A feeling that my values were emptied out, that my heart was treacherous. In July 2020, I gave away nearly all of my possessions and left the neighborhood in Cairo where I'd lived for a decade. I mapped out a few months of housing in Detroit in exchange for some work with friends. I left my apartment, my city, the people around who knew me. On the other side, I tried hard to keep up my routines, but they soon slipped away. I lost most of what helped to define me, the boundaries of a life. Since then, I've been moving around. The call for the Creatures glossary presented itself in November 2020 as an opportunity for continuity, a way to keep my creative practice with the huge transformations taking place. My original proposal fulfilled all the requirements in the brief. In that open call. And to do so, it essentially replicated one of my earlier works, A Dictionary of the Revolution. Maybe that was due to my constant thoughts of return, to my growing desperation to recover something of what I'd lost. My back tooth rotted out. I quit smoking. I regularly burst into tears. The 10-year anniversary of the January 25th uprising approached, then passed. I felt all of this in my body, and I was trying to do the work of letting go. I started to work on the glossary in the spring of 2021, and soon discovered that I'd proposed to recycle an earlier form. I might fail every time, but I don't want to fail in the same way again. Among other objectives, I'm supposed to build a knowledge base for the glossary. So I plan to get that knowledge from scholarly articles in academic journals. And the platform that I'll build will start out with these expert definitions into which people can intervene and make changes. Looking closer, I see my colonial logic. I've begun by establishing a binary between experts and participants. I meet with the Creatures team. There are different relations of power moving through the project, entangled with each other. I become defiant. I stay up late and rewrite my proposal. In my life and now in my practice, I'm doing the work of abandonment. I want to empty the work of its content. I think in my previous project, A Dictionary of the Revolution, I failed by fixing a narrative where I wanted to complicate one. Now I don't want experts. Instead, I want to build a tool that gives everyone authority, everyone access. What if every user has the power to revise, to erase? How will we interact? What language will we make to narrate a way forward? How is it possible to write, to imagine together? I think the answer is a poem, fluid and collaborative. So now I'll take you back to a previous project, a Dictionary of the Revolution. I want to give you an idea of what I mean by failure in this project. So what was this conflict? Where did this conflict arise for me? Between the years of 2014 and 2018, I tried to document language change in Egypt. I conceived of the project during the 2011 uprising, when I spent a lot of time in the streets of downtown Cairo as a newcomer, learning to speak to people there. People were talking about the government, security forces, and other political elements. And I often asked people to explain what certain words meant. I've always liked talking, but as an emerging speaker, I often found myself in the position of listener. My questions evoked rich content, stories and opinions, scenes from the political life of the country, and meanings that sometimes widely varied from person to person. So for a Dictionary of the Revolution, I essentially turned that strategy of talking to people in the streets as a language learner into a methodology for a documentary project. To start conversations, I designed a set of vocabulary cards that you see here, designed and contained in a palm-sized box. It would fit in your hand. And each of the words was used commonly in the speech that I heard in the streets. My collaborators and I traveled around the country with the box and met with people one-on-one, starting conversations. The box was a powerful object. It contained a kind of condensed summary of events and could evoke a flood of feeling, memory, and description for someone who had experienced this time period. We were enacting an intervention with this box, inviting people to repossess language that had been, in many cases, appropriated by the media and political figures in order to redirect the people's movement. This was, in a sense, an activist project that tried to shift relations of power. Later, the project entered a very different phase, one that was solitary and not so much socially engaged. For years, I sat in my studio editing and archiving the recordings, of which there were about 200 hours, transcribed, cut up, and wove together polyvocal text entries, and then designed a digital publication, which you might have opened up by now, for users to navigate through a web of concepts, objects, characters, and events that tell the nonlinear story of the revolution. The publication contains all sorts of language, including testimonies, opinions, lies, and sometimes even hate speech. In some cases, this text restages instances of language used as a violence in order to make visible the drama of collectivity. And sometimes I think perhaps all language is violent because it seeks to limit and to categorize. So here's my question for the project that I'm working on, that I worked on at Creatures Glossary, is maybe, or is also driving my practice in general, is what might a nonviolent language look like? You know, despite the thousands of hours of work I put into making this archive for a Dictionary of the Revolution, into producing the text, I think fixing a narrative of the revolution might in fact be counter to its radical aims. So I keep returning to reflect on the performative research that we conducted with the vocabulary box. The box facilitated language as a social practice, the fluid creation of meanings. It was a prompt to shift relations of power. Decolonial scholars Sinfree Makoni and Alistair Pennycook assert that, quote, languages do not exist as real entities in the world, and neither do they emerge from or represent real environments. They are, by contrast, the inventions of social, cultural, and political movements. And as well, it is the people themselves that have rights to use their styles and ranges of languages in whichever way they do. And our work as decolonial scholars, they're positioning themselves, is to support people, enhance communication between them, and create communicative contexts which would enhance people's abilities to carry out their activities to improve their social welfare. So I'm taking cues from these decolonial scholars, as well as inspiration from the linguistic activism of scholar and teacher Ofelia Garcia, who calls translanguaging, quote, the use of the full language repertoire to make meaning without thinking of the fact that one language is different from the other. It is translanguaging, that is, a way of teaching, a pedagogy that builds on the fluid language practices that bilinguals have. It's an explicitly political project. It, quote, disrupts the hierarchies of named languages that were installed by colonial expansion and nation building to liberate sign systems that have been constrained by socio-political domination, attempting to give voice to all and redress power differentials among speakers. So I'm returning to the words of Makoni and Pennycook. A nonviolent language might, quote, flow and change around us. New combinations of languages and cultures will be put together. Texts will be sampled and mixed in ever new juxtapositions. So in a series of projects that I'm working on, of which the Creatures Glossary is one, I'm exploring these acts of languaging. I'm approaching language as a site where displays of power are continuously produced and contested. I stage interventions such as the conversations that my collaborators and I initiated with the vocabulary box in Egypt. I invite my collaborators to engage in meaning-making processes instead of producing fixed meanings. I try to fabricate space for polyvocal states of being rather than fashion polyvocal texts. So now I'll talk to you about practically, how does that look? And in this particular project, Creatures Glossary, how am I putting these ideas into actual play? So for the Creatures Glossary, I created a set of tools that includes games, a website, workshops, and person-to-person interactions. All of these tools were developed during the height of the COVID pandemic, so they're things that can be take place online. How might we define language together if we can't meet in physical space is an important part of this project. So the tools that I built, they're also metaphors that enact some of the processes of change that the lexicon is meant to describe, right? So this Creatures Glossary is supposed to set out to define a set of terms that are related to creative practice and transformational change. So I took this as a prompt to create a work that is actually itself in a constant state of transformation and change. The glossary has included a number of workshops that are held on Zoom, along with an online campaign inviting individual interactions. During workshops, we interact with each other and use the online tools that I built at the website glossary.languagings. Users can also visit the website alone and interact with the tools there on their own. The website includes open source real-time text editors and games that request input from the users. Data is recorded on a real-time database run by Firebase, which feeds into the interconnected parts of the site creating a hidden web of linguistic interaction that resembles real-life language acts. Real-life language acts are constantly in a state of flux. So the website makes these interactions visible, which under other conditions might remain hidden. I've attempted to allow the user into the back end of the website as much as possible, so that there's not this binary setup between I built the website and you use the website, but that there's a way in which you're intervening into the back end content of the website when you're using it. So I'm going to walk you through some of the elements of the website to make this more concrete. To build vocabulary for the glossary, what terms are we actually going to define? Participants play a game that's adapted from the rapid word collection method, which was developed by a linguist called Ron Moe. It's meant to document languages, often languages that are under threat. So the game is a call and response game that uses the semantic domain of change to ask questions such as, what is a word used to describe a big change? And you can see here the results of several workshops working with building a vocabulary that describes change. This game also exists on the website in a different form, and I'll talk about that soon. Yeah, you could see that, yes, in the word garden on the website, users input their responses to these questions. The website then generates more questions that align with the research aims of the Creatures Project, asking about the tools, practices, feelings, and impacts associated with transformational change. The vocabulary generated by these questions becomes part of the lexicon on the site. And I'm going to see if I can show you really quickly. For instance, yeah, this is when I'm talking about the word garden. So if I wanted a word that describes a big change, like we can use just a pretty basic one, transformation, I can submit this. And it begins to, that goes into the database and becomes a possible word that will be included in the lexicon that appears here on this website. So this actual list of words is constantly changing with every interaction on the site. The playground on the website is a free space where users can select words that to be included in the lexicon. It's another way that you kind of voting for what words will be included. And you can create these word communities, which later appear elsewhere on the site as related terms. It's, yeah, that's that. And also the website dynamically produces a real-time collaborative text editor for each term that is added to the platform that uses an open source software called FirePad. Evolution, for instance, you can see this is a text editor. I could go in here and make a change to it or change it back. I can also see the history of everyone's contributions to the term. So you can, any user can go in and add, change, or erase part or all of an existing definition. And for users who are hesitant to disturb existing text, there's a simple input box that asks, what does this term mean to you? And offers a straightforward additive way to make a contribution. So as I was showing you just now, the collaborative text editor records all the inputs for a particular term. Users can reveal a complete history of every other user's contributions, even if these have been erased from the official definition. We're looking at here the results of a workshop in which we were all working in the same collaborative text editor to define, I think the word was community, and you can see this interesting language that this produces when multiple people are working at the same time. And at any time, one can print the glossary using a function that produces a text containing definitions as they exist on the site at a particular moment. We can see that here. So at any time, you can actually get this sort of more legible lexicon or this glossary document that can be printed. Again, it changes with every user's interaction. It is open, fluid, and changeable both in the definitions and in the set of terms that it is defining. Finally, there's an interview with the word game that asks players to become words, to embody and speak as them. And when played in person-to-person interaction, an interviewer asks the words questions, becoming a collaborator in making meaning. So this is a very poetic way of defining language. In digital play, the computer asks these interview questions selected from an array of questions that were developed during interpersonal play. If my sound works, hopefully we can watch this, this short video, which shows us playing this game in one of the earliest workshops for the project. Can someone tell me if my sound, when it starts?
You mean resilience?
Hi, resilience.
Is the sound working?
Yes, it's working.
Awesome, thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm going to be good. Thank you. Thank you for asking.
What has been your most remarkable experience of the day?
My most remarkable experience is that I managed to push through the day. It's not easy. Sometimes it's more difficult than other days, but every day, if I manage to push through and persevere, then it's a good day. Yeah. So yeah, let's say being able to conduct the day despite the nasty weather. So yeah.
And what makes you unhappy?
What makes me unhappy is crisis, failures, vulnerabilities, lack of planning, lack of contingency. That makes me really sad.
And why?
Because that makes me relevant. That makes me very relevant, and that makes me obsolete, and that makes my existence
and that makes my
unimportant.
existence unimportant, and that
questions my existence at all.
When were you born?
When were you born?
I don't live geographically. I was born in social domains, in ecology. Because of so many natural disasters, my parents decided it would be good to have another sibling in the shape of resilience.
In certain social domains. So I was actually born in the domain of ecology. You know how because of...
I have a brother called Evolution. I have different siblings, many cousins. I have a lot of children.
You have? At your age.
I'm quite old. I'm like really, really old. Well, you can trace me back to Darwin, like evolution stuff. I go way back. I wasn't called resilience at the time. Actually, my name comes from Latin and it means to bounce back. Real thing.
So to close this talk, I'll briefly reflect on the series of projects of which the glossary is a part, in which I'm asking other people to work with me and among each other to bring new language into being, to practice languaging. Language that dwells in, quote, an entanglement of worlds, Garcia. Language in which opacities can coexist and converge, weaving fabrics, Edouard Glissant. Language whose fluidity washes out requests for diversity because, quote, the problem with the term diversity is that it enumerates. Fluidity is uncountable, Maconie and Pennycook. I'm thinking of language as a practice, languaging. We are a changing chorus, each with our own language repertoire. Between us, language emerges. It contains multitudes, it is polyvocal, it wakes up one morning preferring another angle on all that it knows. It is, as Mikhail Bakhtin says, a grotesque body in the act of becoming, continually built, created, and building and creating another body. Language that, quote, gives back much as it receives in luminous mutuality, irregare. We are speaking, we are translating and interpreting, we are listening to each other in and out of time. Thank you so much. I'm ready for your questions or discussion of what I've spoken about.
Thank you, Amira, for that very exciting and innovative and provocative presentation. I'll open the discussion by asking you a question, because your process of meaning making is open. It evolves, meanings are not fixed, yet you use the phrase official definition, right? So I'd like to know, how do you arrive at the official definition of a word? And once you arrive at the official definition, does it mean that it is fixed or it continues to evolve?
I wonder where I use the word official definition. I suppose it might have said that in the place where it's sort of, I mean, official definitions, historically, it's dictionaries, right?
Right.
Fix those definitions, right? And there's like experts that are asked to create those definitions, and then they put them in the book, and you refer back to it in order to continue to, I guess the goal is generally to try to communicate well, right? To be precise about your communication. But as we all know, those definitions, because we keep referring back to them, that's the only way that we can fix them, right? Is if we wrote them down and tried to refer back to them. Otherwise, language does constantly evolve. So I'm not sure where I use the term official definition, but it's also, if I did, I meant it as something that can be intervened into, right? And absolutely, I do not think that language ever ends up in reality in a fixed definition or in the ideal that I would hope to strive for. Yeah. I hope that answered it.
Yes, very interesting. Now the floor is open for questions and comments. Who is taking the question? Aqib?
Yes, sir, I am taking the questions, but there are no questions in the chat box. Yes. So may I go ahead and ask a question myself?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for this. This was really an enriching talk, and I especially like the distinction you made between the meaning process and the creation of fixed meaning. Exactly what Asad sir also asked the question about. Am I audible? Is the voice cross?
Yes, your connection is a little iffy, but please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, could you please discuss, how would translanguaging relate with or differ from the concepts like hybrid language or mixing of languages in the thinking process? And would it differ in the cases of individuals belonging to polylingual communities like India and in monolingual individuals who later acquired one or more languages?
Yeah, in fact, translanguaging thinks of the two scholars that I was quoting from, Makoni and Pennycook and Garcia, when they think of translanguaging, they're thinking of decolonizing language as actually refuting the idea that there even are named languages or there are borders between languages. The idea is that each individual has a unique language repertoire. So say that this is a very radical idea, and it's something that I'm still trying to adapt my mind to. But the idea is that that it is a colonial construction to categorize languages and to say like one of my languages that I'm going to fall back on to say that I speak Arabic, right? But I speak Arabic as someone who grew up in the diaspora, as a person who lived in Cairo, and learned an Egyptian Arabic, but even in Egyptian Arabic, that's variety is specific to Cairo. And then the people in my community, almost all of them speak English. So when we are speaking in that combination of, Egyptian colloquial Arabic and English, and maybe there's some French in there, or some Spanish, or there's something else going on there. But the idea is that in order for me to possess that language as my language, that's just my language, right? I don't have to name it like I just did. These pieces come from here, and these pieces come from here. So I'm thinking about that more in obviously in other works that I haven't presented here. The Creatures Glossary, you could in fact use any alphabet that you would like while you were typing in there. So any types of languages could show up there. But in fact, what happens is people default to speaking English and to using English. And I wanted to actually more directly respond to your question that I do think that in practice, polylingual people who are living in a more polylingual environment are going to approach things differently. But I don't think that necessarily that there is like my approach towards the different communities would actually be different.
Well,
I
thank you,
think
ma'am.
Azhar has a question.
Yes. I'm reading it out now. So this question is from Azharuddin Sahaji, and he asks, do you think similar kind of initiatives are there in other languages? Suppose there are several dialects in one language, think of Hindi or Bangla. Do you think languaging is possible there?
I like that this is asked again in a different way, because I can answer it and maybe even make it more clear that yes, absolutely, I think languaging is possible for any individual, regardless of what their linguistic background is. I do think that there are limits, of course, to understanding, right, and comprehension of each other, and that's an obstacle or perhaps it's not an obstacle. I feel like in a way it's an opportunity to get more comfortable with the idea that you don't always understand everyone else, and how can you live a peaceful, maybe if that's your goal, or or how can you live with conflict, or misunderstanding. How can you adapt a life that actually accommodates that, and not feel like where I started, where people were asking me throughout my life, in the different places that I've lived, where are you from? And that's a complicated story, right? It's not a straightforward story. What I would like is for people to be like a little more comfortable with like that complicated, the complicated answer. But that's not usually what they want. They want it to be a sort of like, let's fix this really quickly, so I can like move on. I don't know, and feel comfortable that I understand you. Yeah, I see there's another question as well.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Let me read it out to you. This, I don't think there's a question. It looks like a comment. This is from Professor Anuradha Ghosh. She says, in the slide on creatures, I'm quite intrigued by the figure created by fusing different species together, much in the way nonsense literature produced by Sukumar Ray in Bangla to demonstrate portmanteau words or even compound words that are neologisms used to convey a notion.
Oh, that's just so beautiful. I love that. Yeah, nonsense literature for sure. When I was growing up, I was loved the Alice in Wonderland books. My God, I used to read them like every single day. The Lewis Carroll ones with there's nonsense poetry in them, and this sort of mathematical literature. So I absolutely am going to, I'm not familiar with Sukumar Ray, and I will seek that out to try to know more about it. Yes, and I'm delighted actually with those texts that get produced in the nonsense texts that I showed, that in which that get produced through those collaborative text editors. I think there's a lot of possibility in things you can't understand, or and how you relate to text that you don't necessarily know the meaning of.
Yeah, so this is a question from Prakriti Bhatt. She asks, if we consider language as fluid and polyvocal, do you think it will be difficult to develop its grammar? Since studying a language often involves creating a standard structure of its usages.
It's a good question, because I think this is related again to this idea of comprehension. I suppose that my project is one of opening up possibilities by creating a different kind of language that I don't necessarily mean to replace the language that we already use, but to create new possibilities with language. So the project of developing grammar is not my project, but I assume that a grammar will emerge in practice, right? Because I think that must be how language has evolved, right? That it's not like there was some. I don't believe that language existed outside of human life, and that there's a grammar that's like some kind of sacred revelation, that this is the grammar, and this is what we'll use. I suppose out of practice it would emerge. Thank you for
ma'am. I don't see any more questions here. I'm sorry, I interrupted, I guess.
No. I was just going to say thank you for the nice compliment that I see in there about the Dictionary of the Revolution.
Oh, all right. So I don't see any more questions, and I think.
Aqib, I can ask the last question.
Sure, sure, sir.
Third one, right? So this is in tune with the question about the grammar, because the idea of languaging is, it looks very empowering, very provocative, very innovative. But then there is also limitation to arbitrariness, isn't it? Because meaning making also requires that those meanings should be accepted by a community. In other words, you need to arrive at a consensus about the meaning of a particular word. That is how things are, right? So this, I'm trying to imagine some of the challenges in the project. Because if there is no consensus about the meaning of a particular word, how many possible meanings will you accommodate? And the more meanings will be accommodated, there will be greater and greater fluidity and ambiguity that will hamper communication. This is, I'm just inviting you to imagine a situation like this.
Well, I don't actually agree with the premise. The premise being that we need that even that we already have this fixed meanings. I think that my project is hoping to reflect more of a reality. The reality being that when I use a word, I may very well, I'm bringing a history of that word and a history of that word's use that isn't actually the same as your history of language use that you're using. So especially like this context is wonderful. I've never been to India, and I know that many of you who are in the Zoom are in India. And in India is just like such a monolithic, huge concept too, right? I mean, I'm sure that there's lots of variety inside India of depending on, you know, who's going to be using this word. I think that, yeah, that thinking about the multiplicity of meaning I really don't believe that is going to like lead to a language decay or communication decay or a decay in comprehension, because I think it's a reflection of the actual reality that we live in.
Great.
That question too, yeah.
So we have another question from Professor Ghosh. Shall I read it out?
Certainly.
Yeah, so she asks, I'm quite intrigued by the erotics of the form rather than the meaning of it all, as meaning is context specific for the reader to construct, or is it for the author/creator to set?
I'm working on trying to understand the question. I'm quite intrigued by the erotics of the form. Well, that's very provocative. I love that. Rather than the meaning of it all. So meaning is context specific. The reader construct. It's between us all. That's like, you know, I think there's a way in which this work, when I was saying that I'm trying to let the user into the back end, there's a blurring between what is a reader and what is an author, right? The author is the reader is the author. If you click a button, I suppose you could just go to the site, just click some buttons and read. But if the moment that you enter a character or respond to a question, you've become an author of the glossary. And that's actually, this is a very, very good question. And that's something I should make a note of to maybe make more prominent in when I'm talking about the work, which is that's one of the things that really disturbed me about the Dictionary of the Revolution, was that once I launched it, it's sort of just like, it can no longer be changed. This narrative of the revolution that I've written down, which is complicated and has lots of voices in it, it still cannot be changed, right? I fixed this story, I fixed the story of the revolution, and no one can change it, and that's one of the things that's amazing about electronic literature. That's one of the opportunities that I'm really trying to take advantage of, is that text on the internet needn't stay the same. It needn't be, and there have been times with the Dictionary of the Revolution where I found an error, say, or I wanted to change the translation because I thought I found a better one, and I've gone in and actually changed the text, but it's only me that can do that. And so with the Creatures Glossary, I wanted to invite folks, to anyone who comes, to be the person who's like, you know what, I don't want it this way, I want to change it to a different way. Yeah, and I think a lot of my work is also thinking about conflict, right? It's thinking about how can one accommodate conflict, or how does one live with conflict? Yeah, that's, I've answered that question now, I think, too. Are there any final questions? Or I'm actually I'm going to share my my email in the chat, so that in case anyone would like to reach out, if they think of a question later, or just want to share something with me, my email is there.
That will be great.
Yeah, so we have no more questions here. I would like to request the moderator to step in and thank the speaker and the chair.
Yes, thank you, sir. And thank you very much. It was such an insightful talk. There is so much to learn from. Thank you everyone for joining us. And it is the end of the day one of our virtual conference. See you all tomorrow with a new session.
Great meeting you, Amira, and great meeting others. Fantastic questions. It was very interesting for me personally. Good luck with your project.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.